welcome back to week 2. So this week you should have read chapters 4, 5 and 6. If you haven't done that, go back, read the relationship handbook, chapters 4, 5 and 6, and then come back and watch this video, because I'm really interested in hearing what you hear as a result, what you see for yourself as a result of reading these chapters in the book. Far more interesting than what I might see, I'm sure. But I'm going to share my what came to me as I was reading the book, and hopefully this will help complement the reading that you've done as well. So one of the things that came to mind for me is how simple it is and how key it is for us to see that the link between understanding how a system works and then change happening as a result of us understanding how that works. So a great example would be, for example, if you've got a thermometer and the thermometer in the corner of the house is going about its business, right? So it's every time the temperature gets too low, it turns the heating on. And every time it gets too high, maybe it turns the air conditioning on, right? And it does that. That's how the system is designed, right? To bring the system back to homeostasis, if you like. Now, if we don't understand that there's something taking care of that homeostasis, then we might think it's our job to try and intervene. So what happens is that every time it gets really hot, we start putting fans on, right? Additional fans and blowing them around the house. And every time it gets cold, we start stoking up the fire and making it really warm, right? And because we think it's our job to manage the temperature. Now, as soon as someone explains to you what a thermometer is and how it works, you realize that all you've been doing is messing with the system, right? The thermometer's not been able to do its job properly because it's had this inhuman interference trying to fix the system, trying to get back to homeostasis, not realizing that something else has been perfectly designed to take care of that already. As soon as we understand how the thermometer works, our behavior changes entirely, right? So when we start to see that, if we're in a rubbish mood and we're around our partners, if we think we have to get ourselves back into a good mood, if we think we have to calm ourselves down, if we think we have to change their behavior in order that we can get back to the default, right, of love and connection, then we don't understand that that's our starting place. We don't understand that is the default. We don't understand that humans are built for love homeostasis, right? Which is that we get caught up in our thinking and then we come back home. Something else does that on our behalf, if you like. I'm going to come back to this bit in a minute. We start feeling low and we think we have to get ourselves out of that. We think we have to change our partner's behavior or whatever it is we think when we're in a low state of mind. We don't realize the system is built to take care of that. If we understand that, it changes how we respond to ourselves when we get caught up in a bad mood. And I think what George points to so beautifully all the way through these 3 chapters is that when we understand how moods work, when we understand the nature of compassion versus resentment, when we get hit by, I never thought about it that way before, that's a jump in understanding. We suddenly see something we didn't before. There's nothing you need to do about it, in the same way you don't keep needing to remind yourself about how the thermostat works. Like, once you see it, once you understand it, no one has to tell you about that again, right? You might forget from time to time and start fanning and all the rest of it. But chances are you'll remember pretty quickly because you know how the system works. So that's really all we're looking for, I think, when we're reading these chapters, is that George is pointing us to a deeper understanding of how relationships work that we maybe weren't aware of before. The idea that we could feel compassion rather than resentment when our partner is behaving badly. Like, you might not have considered that idea before. You might be very resistant to that idea, and that's fine too, but I would ask you to be willing to be open and explore. You might be really resistant to the fact that the thermostat is actually looking after the temperature. Doesn't mean that it isn't, but you might be really resistant to that, especially if you've spent, I don't know, let's say 40 years, like trying to take care of the temperature in your house, only to realize it was never your job in the first place. Right? So you are going to come up against ideas that seem different or novel or that you've never heard before. And if you're willing to consider them, and that's all we're asking, we're not ever asking you to take George's word for anything, but we're asking you to consider that the system might work differently than you think it does. So for example, with last week's homework, where I asked you just to simply enjoy your partner, right? Like, to be open to that, to see that that's possible, that it could be just as simple as that. If you've seen anything for yourself about that over the last week, there's another jump in understanding. And that shift in understanding at like a base level changes everything downstream of it. So you understand, you see something different about that there's always the possibility for compassion, no matter what, no matter, and yes, insert the most extreme examples, right? Like there's a podcast with Mary, and her name's gone out. I'll put it underneath this video because her name's gone out of my mind, about her, Mary Schiller, with the relationship that she was in of extreme domestic violence and abuse, and how even there she managed to find compassion. Now that might sound outrageous, but honestly, listen to the podcast before you make a judgment. Because if we get that insight that compassion is possible at any point, anywhere, no matter what, if we see that that's true, it changes everything when we have that change of heart. George talks about it as a change of heart. So that's what we're looking for. Really simple. Do we understand more about how the system works? The more we understand it, the more our knowing just takes account of everything that we understand in the way the world shows up in front of our eyes. We see and understanding something about compassion versus resentment, we're going to find ourselves in a feeling of compassion more of the time without you doing a thing to make yourself do that. And that was the other point I wanted to come to with you guys today, is something that I've been seeing a lot over the last few months for myself, is the difference between doing something and doing something. Right, one of these distinctions. So what do I mean by that? Well, George talks about not taking our moods so seriously. So this would be a great example. So we can find ourselves in a bad mood, and then we can remind ourselves to not take our thinking so seriously. And then sometimes we can just not take our thinking so seriously, right? Like we remind ourselves and we're able to drop that mood. That very rarely happens, right? What tends to happen is that we get in a bad mood, we start saying, well, you know, that's just your thinking to yourself. You don't need to think about that. Think about something different. You don't need to worry about that. As soon as you stop thinking about it, the mood will be gone. You're like telling yourself principles, facts, in order to change your mood. Highly ineffective, most of the time. There's a difference between that and your mood's just not being taken so seriously. I hope you can see it's a really subtle bit, it's a really key distinction. So what happens in my experience, that as my understanding deepens, I find myself taking my moods less seriously. So my job is not to take my moods less seriously. My job is to deepen my understanding, and everything else gets taken care of after that. Now, so there's the two different tracks, right? There's me trying to manage my moods or not take my moods so seriously and really churning that over. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So I'll be walking along the street and I was thinking, I was in a lovely mood this morning and now I've lost my lovely mood. I know that it's because I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z. I'm just stressing myself out. I just need to drop that. Just drop that, Nick, and you'll be back to the lovely mood you were in, because you know that's the default. No point. It just doesn't make sense. It's like I felt like I was holding onto a hot poker, and I knew to just put the thing down, but I couldn't, and I was trying really hard. And as I was trying really hard, I was getting frustrated because my good mood was forever eluding me. And I got so frustrated with myself, I just gave up. I was like, I'll just be in a bad mood then. And as I walked along, as it happens, a different experience, something caught my eye, I don't know, something over on the beach, and my mind's moved to another topic, and off it went in a different direction. And then I kind of got to the end of the road that I was walking on, and I suddenly came to myself and I realized that I wasn't in a bad mood anymore, that my lovely mood had returned. The first part of that walk was me trying to drop a bad mood. The second part of that walk was me dropping a bad mood. Right? Isn't that funny? It's so ironic. It's so counterintuitive that it's very easy. I'm going to give you a couple more examples, but it's very easy to read the relationship handbook and take on board prescriptions and instructions from it. So, okay, so I need to, when I'm in a bad mood, I need to not take my mood so seriously. I need to have my moods without my moods having me, as Linda Pransky would say. And we write that down as an instruction, rather than seeing that as an invitation to deepen our understanding about how the system works. So if we can just reflect on it and see the truth in it, it's what will start happening. So in the same way that I know that, because I know, and even if I didn't actually, that my dropping of a bad mood, like, it happens without me, the little me, doing it, without my intellect doing it, without my tiny mind, without my personal mind, without Nick doing it. In fact, what moves thought along, what changes experience, what brings us back home, is this greater intelligence field of which we are all part of. In truth, who we really are. So in truth, really, it is ourselves, big S self, that is shifting and moving experience, because it's the mover of thought is a moving creative force, and we are that force. But if we mistake that and we think we are our tiny minds, and then we try and get in our intellects and try and change our experience, you try telling yourself, don't be in a bad mood with him, don't be in a bad mood with him, don't get wound up by her, like, don't, just calm yourself down, right? Like, it's to no avail. You just end up getting more and more and more stressed. But there's something about knowing that moods shift at a fundamental level that allows us to get on with our lives, knowing full well that moods will shift. And there's something that makes you forget that over and over again. Me too, 7 years in, and still forgetting and trying to fix my own mind, right? So another example would be, when you read George's book, it seems like there is a choice between compassion and resentment. You know, he talks about fork in the road, and we can go down the route of compassion or resentment at any point. Now, when he's talking about it, we could read that as if, well, I get to choose. So I see something that looks like a terrible behavior in front of my eyes, and I get to choose compassion or resentment in this moment. And today I'm choosing compassion. So now I'm in the business of trying to reframe the behavior that I see. I'm trying to analyze it. I'm trying to analyze it and think of reasons, nice reasons why they might be behaving badly. I try and feel sorry for them. I try and stand in their shoes. I try and tell myself they've had a bad day. But my intellect's involved now. It's judging, it's critiquing, it's analysing, it's asking the question why, right? Which is always a sign the intellect is involved. And it might come up with some positive reframing of the experience in front of our eyes. But it's not positively reframing something is not compassion. So there's the it's up to Nick to choose between the two paths, versus seeing at an understanding level that compassion is always an option. And as our understanding deepens, as we consider this fact we've never thought of before, or I hadn't until I read this book the first time, we see that it's possible. We get touched by that fact. Isn't that beautiful? That's always an option. We get touched and impacted by that fact. We get moved by it, and our understanding deepens. And every time our understanding deepens, we fall more into love. We fall more into the love that we are. And then as we show up to our loved ones, compassion just naturally arises. It's never a choice. It's just what shows up. Where it might have shown up 1% and 99% resentment, the balance starts to shift as our understanding deepens, without little Nick doing that, but by the bigger self shifting those proportions as we look in this direction. And then I had one more example about, and I've kind of covered it, dropping negative thoughts, right? So dropping negative moods, dropping negative thoughts. Oh my goodness, how often have we all tried to drop negative thoughts? Because that's what we've learned in our 3 principles conversation, that these thoughts are no use to me, so I'm going to try and drop them, and found ourselves frustrated. Versus this understanding, as it deepens for us, we find ourselves transcending our habitual thoughts, our habitual behaviors. Instead, and I love it, George points to this, and I'd never seen this before so clearly, but the opposite of habitual thought, or the alternative to habitual thought, is responsiveness in the moment. So where we might have reacted to somebody coming in and being in a grumpy mood when they come home from work, right, 1,000,000 times before, like we might have had a very habitual response to that. As our understanding deepens, our response to the people around us becomes more responsive. Instead of just running the habitual old patterns all the time, it's like we transcend them, and all of a sudden there's a different way of seeing, there's a different idea that comes to mind. We're never trapped in our habitual thoughts. So the idea that, but I hate it when he does that, I've always hated it, 20 years I've been asking him to stop doing that. With one insight, with one fresh thought, with one responsiveness to the moment, it can be the very thing that means that we fall back in love with them. Like, there's so much possibility and hope in this conversation, because 99% of probably everything that you don't like about yourself or that you wish would improve in your relationship is habitual. It's just habitual thought that you've experienced over and over and over again. And because you've experienced it over and over again, you think there's a problem with you. You think there's actually a problem with your relationship or yourself or him or her. When in truth, all that's happened is that you've had habitual thought that's repeated itself over and over and over and over and over and over again in your life. As our understanding deepens, we surprise ourselves with our responses. We're open to possibility. Now, if we get closed down, no, this is the way it works, and this is wrong, and I don't see why he should get away with that, and why should I have to be the doormat? Why should I have to be compassionate and forgive? Like, if we're going to get compelled by our own stories, if we're going to get really defensive and fixed and rigid about our ideas that we know how it works, we're going to get stuck in our habitual thought. That is just one of our many habitual thoughts and behaviors, right? But what I found as I've been in this whole conversation and this journey for a while, is that I'm more open-minded about everything, like politics, how my kids' education goes, like how my kids respond, what they want to get up to, whether they want to do stuff or not do stuff, what my husband gets up to. Like, I'm so much more, I'm open to what happens in my work, in my business, in my life. I'm opening up. There's an openness that comes with this understanding. And with that openness, it's an openness to form that I just described. But one of the forms is thought. And so I'm open to any thought arising. I am totally prepared to be surprised. I don't want to argue for my limitations. I don't want to get stuck in the same old boring Nick-flavored habitual thought about my relationship. I want to see that person fresh. I want to be responsive in the moment. That's how we keep our relationships alive. That's how they stay fresh. That's how they don't get jaded. That's why we never get stuck in a corner. It can bring a whole new perspective to relationships. As the more that I see, the less I believe anything I think. The more open I become, the more open-minded, the more open-hearted, the more open, the more touchable by life I become. And the simple things, like for me on a personal level, the simple things like the seeing how my husband brings me a cup of tea in the morning and just seeing so clearly how kind that man is in a way that I'd never appreciated before. Like it just, it wakes up a kindness and a softness and a gentleness in me towards him in the way that I get to experience him. And it's such a tiny example, but I'd never had that experience before. Kindness wasn't something that I had associated with him before. I hadn't thought he was mean, but I hadn't been touched by the kindness that he is. And that was a new thought for me. It was a out of the blue thought. It was a sudden, wow, there's a kindness there. Now, as I become more loving, as more love is felt here, I see it everywhere. I see the lovingness in his behavior. And that's really the invitation on this program. As we talked about last week, as we fall more deeply in love, we cannot help but see it in the person that we're in front of. So that's my take on the chapters for this week. If you check your email, I think it is, for the details of next week's chapters, make sure you read those. Please share any thoughts, comments and insights. I'd love to hear back from you. And let me know how you're finding the course, and if there's questions that you'd love me to talk about on future videos, just let me know as well, because as I'm recording this, if you're watching this as I'm recording it the first time around, I'm recording these week by week, I'm reading along with you, so I can build your questions into the future videos if you ask them of me. Right guys, I will see you next week for another video. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as I did. Well, the book anyway. And yeah, I'll speak to you next week. Take care.